In 2020 and January of 2021, President Donald J. Trump was the third president in American history to be impeached by the House of Representatives, and also the first president to be impeached twice. But what was the purpose behind these impeachments? In December of 2019, the first articles of impeachment were introduced by House Speaker Pelosi based on evidence presented by House Representative Adam Schiff, evidence that claimed President Trump forced Ukraine president to investigate his political rival, Sleepy Joe, in exchange for financial aid, a quid pro quo.
The president of Ukraine at the United Nations the other day, and previous to that, he announced through his spokesperson, said there was absolutely no pressure put on him. There was no quid pro quo at all. And if you look at this whistleblowers, which I have a lot of respect for whistleblowers, but only when they're real, his report of the phone call was totally different than the fact.
But Trump, in response to this, released the transcript of the conversation he had with the leader of Ukraine, which showed nothing of what Adam Schiff claimed, proving that Adam, in fact, made up what President Trump supposedly said.
It was a total fabrication. He said this is what, and the only ones that don't like my conversation are the ones that never read it, but they heard Shifty Schiff. That's what I call a lie.
That was the basis of the first impeachment of Trump, which not a single Republican voted in favor of. A purely partisan impeachment that would never have succeeded if the Democrats had lost the House in the 2018 midterms.
By the way, it's a political process, it's not a legal process, and nobody's seen anything like it. In the history of our country, there has never been a disgrace like what's going on right now.
That is why Trump easily survived the Senate impeachment proceedings, 53 Republicans voting not guilty, with only one Republican, Mitt Romney, voting in favor of one of the two articles of impeachments against Trump. Remember, in American law, there are two houses of parliament, the lower house known as the House of Representatives and the upper house known as the Senate. Any bill proposition starts a debate in the lower house, whereby a simple majority will place it at the Senate floor for a final vote, in which 60 Senate votes are required to make it law. The second impeachment was over the January 6th incident, whereby Trump's supporters invaded state property in protest over the failure of overturning Biden's election victory. Fredo Cuomo was the first to call for Trump's impeachment based on this, arguing that Trump knowingly stirred up his supporters to a point whereby they would violently object to any oppositions to his re-election. In other words, Trump was in favor of a violent uprising to maintain his seat in power. It was on this basis that Trump was impeached by the House for the second time, and the Senate voted in a majority to impeach Trump, as 10 Republicans voted in favor of it. But the Senate needs at least 2/3 majority to remove the president, at least 60 votes, which it did not have. But what was the truth behind these impeachments? In the first impeachment of late 2019 and early 2020, it had nothing to do with the two articles of impeachment placed against Trump, but rather the 2020 presidential election.
To impeach a president over a fraud that was committed by other people that want to win an election in 2020, which they won't, is incredible.
Nancy knew from the beginning the Senate would acquit Trump due to the Republican majority there. The purpose of the impeachment was to get public approval behind the talking point that Trump was a bad president, so as to maintain Democratic control of the House in 2020, as well as win the presidential seat in power. The impeachment had nothing to do with the abuse of power or obstruction, but rather smearing Trump in the eyes of the public by making him only the third president to be impeached by the House, which the fake media would use as a talking point to attack him, which would hopefully reduce in either way his approval ratings. But it failed. Trump was at a rally at the time of his impeachment by the House, and also he had a strong economy. But it was Trump's handling or mishandling of the COVID government shutdowns and also the death tolls that the media used as a daily talking point that ate away at his approval ratings among independent voters, and also stirred up Democrats to vote in full force against him in the coming election. In the second impeachment, the goal was to see to it that Trump would never again return to politics. Remember, he was impeached by the House days before Biden's inauguration. The purpose of this impeachment was to see to it that Trump would never again run for president. It had nothing to do with January 6th, as evidence shows that Nancy Pelosi knew in advance that the protesters would invade the House, but did nothing to stop it. Some have speculated that the January 6th Capitol invaders were actually Antifa members, dressed up as Trump supporters, which is how Nancy knew in advance about their plans. But the truth remains that Nancy, at the minimum, used a scandal to her advantage, so as to see to it that the age of Trump was done away with forever. Trump's impeachment by the Senate would see to it that his political career was destroyed, whereby he'd only be remembered as a former disgraced president, similarly to Richard Nixon, a fate that would instill fear in Trump-like politicians, which would entail solidified Democrat rule. But Trump survived both impeachments. Republicans recently won the governor's seat of Virginia, and Trump publicly announced he made his decision to run in 2024.
Let me ask you this, without giving the answer what the answer is, have you made up your mind?
Yes.
With Sleepy Biden in office and his mishandling of Afghanistan and the economy, there's a strong likelihood that Trump will win in 2024 with a Republican-controlled House and Senate behind him.